Sweden's nights can be quiet in a way that unnerves you. Streetlights hum, water cuts through cities like dark ribbons, and forests press up against the edges of towns. The country is orderly, rational, until it isn't. Tonight, we're stepping into 5 Swedish mysteries that refuse to die. Cases that changed laws, split the public, and still raise the same question. How can so much be known and so little proven? If you care about source-based, respectful true crime and cold case analysis, subscribe now and tell me which case caught you hardest. Because in Sweden, the details are cold and the debates are hot. Disclaimer: brief, this documentary-style script uses publicly available reporting and official statements. It does not accuse any person or organization. Theories are presented as possibilities, not facts. Let's begin with the case that defines Swedish mystery for the rest of the world. The night a prime minister fell on a central Stockholm street, and the gun that never surfaced. Case 1. The assassination of Olof Palme, 1986. Friday, February 28, 1986. Just after 11:20 p.m., Sweden's Prime Minister Olof Palme left the Grand Cinema with his wife, Lisbeth. No security detail. It was the ordinariness of it that still shocks people. A man stepped up from behind on Sveavägen near the Tunnelgaten stairs. 2 shots from a .357 caliber revolver, 1 fatal. The shooter bolted up the steps and vanished into Stockholm's brittle winter air. Police launched arguably the largest criminal investigation in Swedish history. Thousands of witness interviews, hundreds of potential suspects, many conflicting descriptions. At various points, investigators chased leads linked to extremist politics, foreign intelligence, and lone offender theories. Over the years, a suspect was tried and acquitted. New task forces were formed. The murder weapon remained unrecovered, a hole at the center of the case that never closed. In 2020, prosecutors publicly pointed to Stig Engström, a graphic designer nicknamed the Scandier Man, as the most likely perpetrator and formally closed the investigation. Engström had died years earlier. There would be no trial, no conviction, and therefore, in the strict legal sense, no judicial resolution. Ballistics never delivered a match. For critics, unanswered problems remained. Witness timings, position on the pavement, and how certain one can be when the crucial gun is missing. For supporters of the 2020 conclusion, the timeline and behavior patterns were persuasive enough to close the file. And yet the questions stay. How does a man fire 2 shots on one of Sweden's busiest streets and simply evaporate? How much certainty is enough when the courts will never hear the case? Stay with me, because the next case forced Sweden to confront the limits of science, media, and the justice system in a way few countries ever have. Case 2. The Catrine da Costa murder, 1984. Summer, 1984. Dismembered remains were found at separate locations around Stockholm and Solna. Forensic work identified the victim as Catrine da Costa. The public called it stickmordet, the dismemberment case, a term the victim never deserved. Investigators pursued multiple directions. Over time, the case focused intensely on 2 physicians. What followed became a decades-long tangle of court decisions, professional sanctions, media commentary, and social debate. 2 crucial points you must hold together. No one was convicted of murder in a Swedish court. The case nevertheless shaped Swedish public life, medical oversight debates, and conversations about expert testimony and memory. Some witnesses struggled with timelines. Some testimony became hotly disputed. Elements of forensic interpretation were challenged. The head and certain organs were never recovered, making both identification work and cause of death analysis more fragile than the public initially understood. As years passed, the absence of a definitive verdict kept pressure on the justice system. The case still polarizes. Was it an investigative tunnel vision problem, a media ecosystem problem, or a tragedy compounded by the limitations of the era's forensics? Time does not heal unanswered questions, it calcifies them. And in Sweden, the Da Costa case remains a reminder that a compelling narrative is not evidence. Before we move on, ask yourself, if an investigation shapes policy and careers, but leaves the central truth unproven, what do we call that? Closure? Or just fatigue? Now to a northern farmhouse where a brother found a scene that would rewrite Swedish legal history, not because it yielded a culprit, but because the wrong one went to prison. Case 3. the Kalamark murder and the acquittal of Kaj Linna, 2004 to 2017. April 2004, Kalamark, a village in Norrbotten County. A man was attacked in a farmhouse. Another relative survived. The crime was brutal, but it appeared narrow. Money, a small circle of potential motives, and a timeline that seemed, at first, straightforward. Police built a case that led to the conviction of Kaj Linna in 2004. He was sentenced to life. For years, the public saw the case as solved. But cold cases sometimes reopen not because of new DNA, but because something in the story keeps creaking. Journalistic re-examinations and legal reviews highlighted issues: witness reliability, timeline contradictions, and the weight the original trial placed on contested statements. In 2017, Sweden's Supreme Court granted a new trial. The verdict flipped. Linna was acquitted. The following year, he received a record compensation for wrongful imprisonment. Headlines gripped Sweden not because of the money, but because there was no longer a convicted offender. The Kalamark murder stands unsolved today. The lessons bite. Eyewitness confidence is not equal to accuracy. A coherent narrative can still be wrong if it rests on sand. When a conviction collapses, the state owes more than compensation. It owes a credible path forward. Ask yourself, what do we demand from a justice system after an acquittal, an apology, or a renewed investigation with new eyes? The answer decides whether a case study becomes a blueprint for reform or just a cautionary tale we tell ourselves late at night. And speaking of late-night cautionary tales, there's a case so infamous in Sweden that it turned into a legal shorthand. Two men, one victim. Each points at the other. The law must decide whether it knows enough to punish someone, or whether uncertainty itself wins. Case 4. The Lindome Case, 1990. Det var han eller hon. Lindome, 1990. An elderly man was killed after a break-in. Two suspects landed in the dock. The core problem? Each blamed the other for the fatal act. Forensics could link both to the scene. What it couldn't do, with courtroom-grade certainty, was determine who delivered the deadly blows. Without that, the prosecution's narrative tore down the middle. The outcome, acquittals on the most serious charges, triggered nationwide debate. Lindome fallet became shorthand for a structural weakness. When two offenders act together, how should the law assign responsibility if you can't isolate the final act? Over the following years, Sweden refined concepts around medgärningsmannaskap, co-perpetration, and evidentiary thresholds, but the cultural impression stuck. To many Swedes, Lindome symbolizes a haunting question. When the state can't tell you who did what, does justice require us to let everyone go, even if we're sure someone is guilty? Here's the thing. Lindome isn't just a courtroom puzzle. It is the emotional geometry of doubt, and once you feel it, you start to see it in other cases. Which brings us to the Baltic Sea, a storm, a ship that went down in minutes, and a truth that refuses to lie still. Case 5. MS Estonia, 1994. Tragedy, certainty, and the holes that won't close. In the early hours of September 28, 1994, the passenger ferry MS Estonia sank in rough seas en route from Tallinn to Stockholm. 852 lives were lost, a trauma shared by Estonia, Finland, and Sweden. The official Joint Accident Investigation Commission concluded in the 1990s that a bow visor failure led to catastrophic flooding. Memorials were built. An international sanctity agreement was established to protect the wreck. But mysteries don't always live in the who. Sometimes they live in the why that keeps changing shape. Over the decades, families and independent researchers argued that crucial details were missed or underexplored. In 2020, new documentary footage appeared to show a large hole in the hull plating, imagery that didn't fit neatly with the original report. Authorities in the region responded. Swedish, Estonian, and Finnish agencies launched additional technical inquiries. As of mid-2024, the official cause remains the bow visor failure and rapid flooding, while supplementary investigations continue to examine hull damage and other factors. So is MS Estonia an unsolved mystery? In court of law terms, it's an accident with an official explanation. In human terms, it is a case where some families feel the paperwork never matched the sea. That tension between a closed file and an open wound is why it belongs on this list. It's a reminder that closure and consensus are not the same thing, and that safety lessons can be stable while narratives remain contested. Before we close, I promised 5, and we've done 5. But Sweden harbors one more bonus mystery, the 1946 ghost rockets. A summer after World War II, Sweden reported hundreds of sightings of cigar-shaped objects streaking the sky, sometimes said to plunge into lakes. The Swedish Air Force investigated. Declassified archives show serious attention, not tabloid fantasy. Divers probed impact sites. Nothing definitive was recovered. Theories ranged from meteor fragments to foreign missile tests to misidentified natural phenomena. Why mention this in a true crime-heavy list? Because it shows you the core Swedish pattern: methodical institutions meeting a stubborn unknown. It's in the DNA of the country's mystery culture, a kind of calm rigor pushing against a fog that does not lift. Now let's thread these cases together and end with why these 5 still haunt Sweden. What unites a prime minister's assassination, a dismemberment case without a conviction, a murder overturned on appeal, a two-suspect paradox, and a fairy whose ghosts live in metallurgy? It's not just the lack of final answers. It's the way each case pressed on the structure of Swedish society. Palme exposed how open, low-security politics collides with violence, and how ballistics without a weapon can't close a national wound. Da Costa forced debates about expert testimony, media ethics, and due process, and how the absence of critical remains limits the science. Kalamark proved that narratives can harden into verdicts, and that wrongful convictions aren't theoretical, they happen in careful countries too. Lindome embedded a legal riddle. Uncertainty about individual roles inside a joint act can block accountability. Estonia taught that the difference between official cause and complete truth can become a permanent fracture, one we manage, not mend. If you've ever wondered why Sweden invests so heavily in cold case units, forensic modernization, and transparency reforms, look at these 5. They aren't just mysteries, they are drivers of policy. They built the Swedish appetite for genetic genealogy in newer cases. And yet, even in Sweden, 3 things remain true. Eyewitness memory is fragile. Evidence without context misleads. Time fixes almost nothing on its own. So tell me, which of these would you reopen first if you could push one file to the top of a Stockholm desk tomorrow? Palme, because closure matters? Da Costa, because a family deserves more than debate? Kalamark, because somewhere out there a killer learned the wrong lesson? Lindome, because the law needs a cleaner doctrine for joint crimes? Or Estonia, because engineering answers are never done when loved ones still ask why? If this kind of respectful, sourced mystery work is your thing, subscribe, share this with someone who thinks Sweden has no skeletons, and leave your theory below. Sweden's nights are quiet, but the questions are not.